Hello YouTube and gamers and denizens of the internet. It's Just Your Average Gamer here with a new video concept called Just Your Average Gamer's Thoughts on blank. In these videos I will be mostly rambling or spewing my thoughts, if you will, on a specific topic in an unscripted, fairly laid back manner where I kind of just rant or rave, depending on the topic, about, the topic. In this case, as you can probably see from the title of the video, the topic of my thoughts today is the topic of many people's thoughts these days, and that is CD Projekt Red. Now, in this case, I'm referring to the company as a whole. That's what I'm going to talk about, as opposed to just specifically talking about Cyberpunk, which I did in a rapid-fire review, and I will do in a much more in-depth review that I am still currently working on. So for this video, I'm just going to give you, probably in about 10-15 minute video, my thoughts on the company, CD Projekt Red, its past, its present, its future, and what I think of all of it. So let's jump right in. CD Projekt Red, for me, prior to that fateful day in December when they released Cyberpunk, was the darling of the gaming industry. Not only had they, released arguably one of the greatest RPGs and just in general greatest video games ever made in The Witcher 3, but they, had also had two previous very well received games before that. They also have a very successful, actually a couple of very successful spin-off projects based around Gwent, including the standalone Gwent game, and then Thronebreaker, Witcher Tales, which is, a more in-depth game with the story and all that, but the gameplay revolves around Gwent. But even more so than their success with their games and just the overall quality of the Witcher franchise, CD Projekt Red was renowned for its business practices in an industry where we are dominated by the likes of EA and Ubisoft nickel and diming us every which way. It was truly a breath of fresh air and a beacon of hope when The Witcher came out and we got all those free DLCs, and then when they released the main expansion packs for the game that, at least with the second one, Blood and Wine, which were literally bigger than most games that you would pay full price for, but you're getting it for, it's $20 for like 40 hours of content. It was like they could do no wrong, and they really weren't doing any wrong. It wasn't even just like, oh, we're looking past some shady stuff. No. Like, their games were great. Their business practices were admirable and standard that honestly the rest of the industry should look towards, and that gamers should support, because they're doing the exact types of practices we've been wanting. They're doing the opposite of what the EAs and the Ubisofts do, and obviously that really grew their popularity as much as the love for The Witcher and just the love for their games helped them grow. You could argue maybe not just as much, but a huge factor in their growth and their popularity, and all the hype leading up to Cyberpunk was because of their business practices, was because they treated the customer with respect. They didn't nickel and dime you. They promised a complete, mostly working product at release, because even The Witcher 3 had bugs at launch. Most games these days do, but it was still at least a complete game. But obviously, and we'll go into more detail in this, in my Cyberpunk review, a lot of this has changed now since in the last few months since Cyberpunk launched. As most people probably know, that launch was nothing short of a disaster. The game was broken, in at least on the last gen consoles, and even on PCs and current gen consoles, it had its problems. It completely fell short of almost every promise and promoted feature of the game. And what ultimately we got was a shell of what we were promised. And, still paying full price for a game that, maybe really wasn't much more than an early access, possibly, compared to, what we expected. But beyond Cyberpunk, because, as we'll talk about in my review, and as I mentioned, I think a bit in my rapid fire review, Cyberpunk, their fate is sealed. No matter what they do, this isn't the type of game that's built for a No Man's Sky kind of revival, because No Man's Sky is a procedurally generated open universe sandbox game where you can consistently add content that doesn't fundamentally change or alter what's there. But a game like Cyberpunk, a story-driven RPG, well, action-adventure, you don't have that luxury, because you would have to fundamentally change the structure and the flow of the game in order to really put back in a lot of the stuff that was cut, especially from a story perspective and our choice and consequence perspective. I mean, just the amount of work that would probably take for them to make the origin stories relevant in of itself, it would be a monumental undertaking that would alter the game, and it's probably just not going to happen. They'll fix the bugs eventually. They'll add some quality of life improvements. We will get some new content through DLC and stuff that may, bring back cut features and all that. But the game itself, I don't think, can ever be fully salvaged. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about the company, because as much as, Cyberpunk may be a disaster, what does it mean for the company as a whole, and for the company's future, and for their future games? And unfortunately, it means quite a big deal, because this wasn't just another game that came out and disappointed. We see this all the time. BioWare has basically patented being a disappointment since 2012. So why is it such a big deal here? Well, it's like I said, CD Projekt Red wasn't just loved because The Witcher 3 was such a great game. They were loved because of their business practices and their consumer-friendly approach to the industry. But then, as we see with Cyberpunk, they completely threw all of it out of the window. They blatantly proved themselves to be liars. You can even go as far as to say, cheats or swindlers or whatever you want. We were all duped into believing Cyberpunk was going to be this definitive next-gen genre, industry-defining game and experience. But it wasn't. And it wasn't just that it fell short of what were clearly some ambitious expectations, but it didn't even match industry or genre standards from a few years ago, let alone this year. And they completely destroyed one of their main promises, which was initiated way back at the first teaser, when the release date was when it's ready. That was what they said for years. It'll come when it's ready. And that, that's a great promise to make, because that's what we want. We want games to come when they're ready. We don't want games to come out that we have to wait months to get patched and changed and altered so that we can get the game we were promised. But then, they obviously broke that promise when they released Cyberpunk in the state that it is. So what does that mean for the future of the company, which has been a topic on my mind and a topic on many people's minds, is, simply put, can CD Projekt Red recover from this? What is the future of the company in light of this catastrophe? And can they recover and regain the goodwill of the industry and regain their title as, the good guys in the industry? And honestly, I don't think they can, because I think the damage was just so severe. And it's not because developers and such can't rebound from incidents like this if you look at it in a vacuum. If you look at other games that have launched in this state, I mean, just look at Ubisoft and EA, they still make a lot of money. People still buy their games. They still have hope that their games are going to be better and stuff, because, we always get what we expect with them. And this is what it really comes down to, and I think this is why the reaction and hate boiling over is so severe is because, yeah, okay, EA will come out and release Madden 22 in a few months, and it'll be the same thing that Madden has been for the last 5 years, and it'll be broken and buggy and all these wonderful things, but there won't be an uproar over it because every single person who knows the industry and every single person who, even if they don't know the industry well, who plays Madden, knows that this is what they're going to get. For better or worse, this is who EA is. Take it or leave it. And same with other companies like Ubisoft. We know what they are. The problem with CD Projekt Red is we thought we knew what they were. We thought they were this beacon of hope in an industry mired in corporate greed and nickel and diming monetary tactics. But then they proved to us that they weren't. And while maybe their actions aren't as shady as some of the things these other companies have done, in contrast to the way people viewed them and to the way they presented themselves, they fully, over the last 5 years since The Witcher 3 came out, fully embraced the notion, the idea, and the titles that we bestowed upon them as this, white knight in the industry. And because of that, this fall is that much more severe, because it's not just, oh, look, here's another company that's greedy, blah, 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 blah. Like, no. This was the golden boy, and even he, betrayed us and, sold out and whatever adjectives you want to throw at it, they shit the bed. And it's just so much worse because it's better to, if you're going to do shady things, especially in an industry like video games, it's better to be upfront about it. It's better to just do it and don't act like you're not going to do it. Credit where credit's due. EA doesn't pretend to be anything it's not. But CD Projekt did, and then proved to be, just as bad in some regards to EA. And the reason why that hurts so much more than Madden 21 or 22 being the same thing is because we didn't expect it. Because it wasn't what was supposed to happen. CD Projekt Red was supposed to be different. And, even if, Cyberpunk, maybe you could argue never could have lived up to its hype, which is a fair argument to make. It certainly could have landed a lot better than it did. And even if the game didn't, blow everyone's mind, if it had at least released in a complete state and had retained most of its content that had been advertised over the last few years, as opposed to cutting a lot of it, if the game was at least to be able to be said, okay, for better or worse, this is at least a complete game. But that's not what we got. We got, a shallow, empty shell of a game in a lot of respects. And because of the love and the belief of CD Projekt Red's, if you will, moral superiority in the industry, it hurts that much more. Which leads to the question, will that also make it harder for the gamers to forgive? So let's jump ahead a couple years. And, some point or another, Cyberpunk will be, finished with its DLCs and expansions. And CD Projekt Red's going to have to make and release another game. Whether that's The Witcher 4 or Cyberpunk 2078 or something else completely different. The question is, how will that game be received? And how well will it sell? And what does CD Projekt Red have to do with that game to repair its image, if even possible? And like I said, I don't know if it is, because trust is a fragile thing. You're exposing yourself. You're putting yourself at risk for betrayal or pain or whatever you want to call it when you trust someone or something full-heartedly. And I know myself and probably many other people full-heartedly trusted CD Projekt Red after The Witcher 3. Because why wouldn't you? They released one of the greatest games ever and did all these things right in regards to business practices and interacting with their player base and all that. And so gamers kind of let their guard down because we've at least for the last decade at least, been living in an industry that's very much rampant with these kinds of false promises and disappointments and unfinished games and such. But when you put your trust that there's someone out there who's actually going to not do those things, and then they do it, it hits you. It hits you hard. It hit me hard, and it hit, probably many millions of other Cyberpunk players, Witcher fans, and just CD Projekt Red fans in general extremely, extremely hard. And I don't know that their next game alone could be enough to recuperate that trust. I don't think they could ever really gain, look, the glory era of CD Projekt Red is over. It will never come back. These last 6+ years, leading up to and at The Witcher 3's launch and post-launch, but we will never get that back again. We will never look at CD Projekt Red again as the darling of the industry, as the white knight of in the sea of dark corporate greed. It will never happen again. I don't believe they could ever fully regain our trust because of this. But let's look a bit more optimistically and say, okay, what in theory would they have to do to regain that trust? Well, first of all, they need to do everything they can to make Cyberpunk as close to the game that we saw in 2018. And I mean everything. They have to pull out all the stops. But like I said just before, I think there's a limit to how much they can do given the nature of the game. So beyond that, it will really come down to their next game. They have to make sure that A, it comes out when it's ready and not a moment before. B, that it's actually a good RPG, unless they, really try something out of their comfort zone as far as genres are concerned. It has to be a real tight, good game, RPG. Not something that is called an RPG for 6 years and then in the last 2 years of development they swap it to action adventure. No, you can't. None of that bullshit. Which is why I think, pre-Cyberpunk, I'd say there's no way the next game after Cyberpunk is The Witcher 4. It'll probably be Cyberpunk 2078 or whatever they'll call the sequel. But now you have to wonder, what are they going to do, because there's so much goodwill they need to build back up that making another Witcher game may seem like the logical choice to, because that's clearly their comfort zone. They clearly know what they're doing with that franchise, and it would probably be the easiest way for them to make a really impressive game that could bring people back into the fold. But all that being said, I just don't know that they can create a game good enough to reignite that trust and that passion for the company. Because there's a lot of people at the company who were at the company during the Witcher days that aren't there anymore, and it's also very clear that the corporate bosses have no interest in playing the nice guy anymore. They ran with it and abused it to such an extent that it's honestly it's worse than anything EA has done, at least as regards to its interaction with its fans and such. Like they took all that goodwill and then they cashed it in such a dirty way. Cyberpunk was one of the most pre-ordered games of all time. It had so many people playing it at launch, and now there's so few people playing it now because of, the game being incomplete and, bad in a lot of ways. And I don't think I've ever seen an instance, at least in the gaming industry, of a company so willingly putting the gun in their mouth and pulling the trigger because, out of the back of their throat is going to come a lot of cash, I just don't think they could ever be fully forgiven for it, because it's such a malicious betrayal of the goodwill and trust that they had built up, that even if they release a Witcher 4 that is, by all accounts, better than The Witcher 3, which I don't even know if is possible, but let's just say, for argument's sake, they release a perfect game, and that will obviously go a long way to rebuilding their image and making them likable again. But I don't think people will ever fully trust them again, and it's a shame, because CD Projekt Red really could have been a leader in this industry, that really could have pushed for change through in other companies, because let's just hop timelines for a moment and say that Cyberpunk lived up to the hype and was released when it was ready and was everything we wanted it to be, and then still had their good business practices, free DLC, bang for your buck expansions, all that stuff. And I think at that point, especially with how much more attention Cyberpunk got leading up to its release than Witcher, it would really have been a profound moment in the industry, and I really think it would have made it very hard for other companies to not look at and see that, hey, maybe it's a better idea to not be garbage to our base, to our customers, because look at how much success CD Projekt Red is having by being honest, by making sure their games are complete, by not rushing deadlines. But we'll never have. We don't live in that timeline, unfortunately. And I believe, and it's easy to say now maybe because we'll never know, but I really believe that if Cyberpunk had lived up to the hype, it would have changed the industry, not just in regards to the game itself and the types of things we would see in games going further, but in terms of the business practices, because before Witcher 3, you could say, okay, well, it worked because they were a lesser known company, and it makes sense that they took this path to gain people to like them, blah, 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 blah. But now it's like they are a top tier company, and they're still doing good stuff, and Cyberpunk lives up to the hype. Then it really could have possibly led to other companies really taking a long look at themselves and saying, hey, maybe we should follow suit because they seem to be onto something here. But they didn't do that, and it's a shame, because not only has it more or less destroyed what was my favorite gaming company for the last 7 years, it's put a real dampener on the possibility of the industry moving past these practices and these, it's just a shame, really. It more than anything else, the story of CD Projekt Red is a tragedy, and it's a shame because they had the means and the power within them to, at the very least, be a positive influence in the industry, if not utterly shape it and change it for the better. But now that they've come out and shown themselves to be nothing more than what EA is, if anything, they're worse than that. It's not gonna inspire EA and Ubisoft and these other companies to make changes. They're gonna keep doing what they're doing because it's safer. Because at the end of the day, if you're just a piece of shit company and you own it, you're gonna get less hate than pretending to be a good company and then being a piece of shit. And so EA will just look at it and be like, hey, let's just keep doing what we're doing because look what happened to them. And there's no guarantee that any company that tries that route won't fall under the same traps and make the same mistakes. And despite, EA having years of shady things literally killing development studios, like their future is brighter than CD Projekt Red's, because this one mistake was so catastrophic. It was so detrimental to everything they stood for that look, I really hope I'm wrong. I really hope that they can turn it around, and I will still look at their next game with much interest. I'm still eagerly waiting, anything in regards to an update to Cyberpunk. We're still waiting on patch 1.2, and I know they got hacked and stuff, but man, it's been 3 months. Almost 4 months, and what have we gotten? I think the most recent thing I saw, I don't even think it's out yet as a time of recording, but the cops won't pop right up in front of you. They're gonna pop up 100 feet away from you now. All right, guys, let's give ourselves a little pat on the back. No, what are they even doing? I know COVID, I know the hack, but give us something. Where's the free DLC? I'd have to go back and check, but I feel like by 4 months in, The Witcher had at least a couple of its free DLCs already. Like, you got to give us something. And they're just not. I feel like there must be like a furious internal crisis going on at the company, and I worry that we'll maybe not even get all the things we were promised, post-launch in regards to DLCs and expansions. It may be like an Andromeda situation where they just pull the plug on their planned DLCs because of how poorly received the game was. I don't think it'll go that far. I think they have to at least release one major expansion to try and like prove that they can make a game again. Like if they release a Blood and Wine styled expansion that really kind of embraces, the things that were promised ahead of time and gives us, even if it's a relatively small slice, but a perfect slice of what this game should have been, then maybe that will create some goodwill going forward and potential for a sequel. But I just don't know, man. It's hard. What could have been, Anyways, those are my thoughts on CD Projekt Red. Obviously, the video went a little longer than I initially intended, but I hope you enjoyed it either way. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on how bad this was for CD Projekt Red, and whether there's a path forward to redemption. I don't see it right now. I don't see it. Anyways, that's it for me. Just your average gamer's thoughts on CD Projekt Red. On my next average thoughts will be on another studio that is still working to regain some goodwill, but I think has a bit of an easier path towards it. Bethesda. So keep an eye out for that.